Are you expecting a witty hook? Well, you're not going to get one. You're just going to have to give us the benefit of the doubt on this episode. Welcome to Wokepedia Podcast. Wokepedia Podcast is a ministry of enemies within the church. And I'm Pastor Sam. And of course, I'm joined like always with Kyle Witt and Micah Sample. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing pretty good today, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here again to talk about more good stuff. At least we hope it's good. We hope it's helpful to you listening.
I-
Even if you're woke, we hope that gives you something to think about and to repent of.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
Sam, I was giving you the benefit of the doubt and thinking that you'd come up with a clever hook, but I see that I was wrong for doing that, so I'm going to have to repent of that. But no, just kidding. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to get to talk into our subject today, which is, in fact, the benefit of the doubt and how the woke abuse it. So stay tuned, guys, for this episode today of the Wokepedia podcast. Settle in with a nice hot chocolate. It is December. It is Christmas season, as you can tell by Sam's background. So, yeah, stay with us a while. Take your coat off.
Absolutely. I mean, unless it's really cold in your house, then you can keep your coat on. That's fine. Or if you're outside walking, like keep your coat on. But anyway,
No, you have to take it off.
Don't you guys listen to podcasts when you're walking? I do. But anyway, last time we went on this mini series, we talked about how the woke abuse sympathy, and they really do that, and they've continued to do that. But that's not their only abuse, and it's kind of, there's some irony here because a lot of times they kind of sound the siren on abuse sometimes when there's not abuse there. But in reality, the woke are some of the biggest abusers, wouldn't you say, Kyle?
100% hypocritical and abusers. They're always, they're giving into leftist ideologies. And what is the left famous for? Rules for thee and not for me. We're allowed to do this, but if you do it, no, you're evil.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality
is,
yeah, absolutely. The reality of it is that they think that in order to, the way that they frame things is through this idea of the benefit of the doubt, which, of course, we kind of hear that phrase and we think that's a positive thing because it's like, well, don't you want to not assume that people are, sinning? Don't you want to? Because what if you were accused of something falsely, and wouldn't you want people to be at your defense? But it is a two-edged sword because yes, on the one hand, we do. I mean, even in our legal system, we do have the presumption of innocence before being proven guilty, but not to the degree that once there's proof of guilt that we just disregard that. But that's exactly what we see with the woke, So if they ran the legal systems, the jails would be totally empty and the streets would be filled with criminals.
Oh, so like Seattle?
Yeah, basically, yeah. Or any woke city, New York City, San Francisco, all the above, or Illinois, coming up this next year with the new law that was passed that's going to free a bunch of people that were convicted of various crimes. So yeah, that's exactly right.
I still think Seattle prefers to be called the autonomous zone. What was it, Chad or Chaz or whatever?
It was Chaz.
Yeah, with that autonomous zone. But you look at this. What are some of the benefits that the woke gain from abusing this benefit of the doubt? No pun intended there by looking at the benefits. but what are some of the benefits that they get from this? What is it that they gain?
Well, I mean, the ultimate goal of any sort of manipulation is to try and get someone onto your side.
Right.
Your first objective is maybe through this, I can get you to suspend your reasoning and you'll join my side. But that's not the only thing that they, that's not the only reason. There's other benefits that they gain by abusing this within you, this giving of some benefit. Uh, I mean, to get you to convert to something, what do you have to do? You have to get someone to lower their defenses. And has that been something that we've seen happening in the evangelical world in this country with woke stuff? Is trying to get people to lower defenses. Has that happened?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, I think an example of that, I mean, with homosexuality in particular, we see that because people are always like, well, Jesus, tells us to love our neighbors and judge not lest ye be judged. And, quoting all kinds of verses totally out of context in order to say that ultimately, this sin is just like every other sin. And so we don't need to be worried about it as Christians. Well, that's just what has that led to? Well, in various denominations, PCUSA and the United Methodist Church, which is splitting over that very issue, it's led to acceptance of sodomy as something that isn't, they don't think it's a sin anymore. And so you kind of see, I mean, people will say, well, that's a slippery slope fallacy, but we see it in action. It's just true. It's just what's actually happening. It's a description of reality. And so, yeah, the benefit of the doubt can lead to very dark places, to the ultimately to the affirmation of sin if it's abused in this way. So, yeah, I totally echo what you guys are saying right now.
Yeah, I mean, they really do lower defenses terribly with the benefit of the doubt, and that's ultimately been probably the biggest way that I've seen this come up. And I don't know about you guys, but I've actually seen this abuse of the benefit of the doubt maybe more than any other abuse that we've really thought about for this mini series. And it, it's amazing because I've been doing podcasts about the woke since 2018, so I've been doing it here for a little while. That's ancient in podcast years, actually. To go and to look at that, and when when you look at that, I can't tell you the amount of conversations that I've had with people who, after going and presenting information, evidence that somebody is woke, I've had people come up to me and say, "Well, that's not really what they meant. They didn't mean that. What when they said that thing, that's not really what they mean. I mean, they're not really woke, and you just need to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're not reading it charitably. If I could have $1 for every time I've heard that one, it, it, and it's one of those things where it seems like it's almost their only defense is that, but you just need to give them the benefit of the doubt. I know that they're, marching with Black Lives Matter, but they're not woke and things like that. I mean, have you guys encountered this abuse quite a bit as well?
Oh yeah, I mean that again, like you said, I think that's the most common objection that I've run into, doing this work, working with Wokepedia and even things before that is that same exact thing. And
Mhm.
it's not so and you clarified this, but I want to clarify it, double down on that clarification. We're not talking about a situation where we're talking, having a discussion with someone, and we're just making a claim that someone's woke. No, we're talking about here is information. If we're going to use a legal analogy, this is not uh, more likely than not. This is not a civil trial. This is a criminal trial. We've proven it beyond a
Right.
reasonable doubt. Here's all the hard evidence. Here's multiple times they've clarified that, yes, they hold to this position. These are the tenets they're embracing. This is what they're teaching. You present all that, and then they go, well, that's a really uncharitable way to interpret things. It's like, but I'm not interpreting things. I'm giving you the information. Like this
Yeah.
is their own mouth saying
Right.
these things.
Yeah.
I,
Well, I mean, personally,
Uh,
when I was a member of College Park Church in Indianapolis, a mega church there, um, they were going off in a woke direction. Their pastor, Mark Vroegop, was publishing, articles and resources that are still up on his website. on racial reconciliation, and he literally promoted books like White Fragility, which is the most anti-white racist book I think I've ever seen, and Woke Church, which is an abuse of well, it's critical race theory, so it's an abuse of so many different things. And what I kept hearing when I was pointing some of this stuff out at the beginning was, well, I don't know if Pastor Mark really means that. I mean, I don't know if he's not a leftist. He's a conservative. He's on the Gospel Coalition, because that was supposed to convince me. Ironically, now that's a pretty good indicator that you're not.
The
But
Social Gospel Coalition. Yeah.
The Social Gospel Coalition. That's right. But that's what I saw, and that's what I kept hearing repeatedly when I started pointing things out, until it got to the point where, when I released a letter, there were, I got hundreds and hundreds of responses of people who were leaving College Park Church because they finally saw it. But the whole journey to that letter was filled with people saying, you got to give them the benefit of the doubt, and you got to constantly assume that they couldn't have possibly meant what they clearly meant, even given the evidence that you've got. And so that's just one microcosmic example of what we're seeing on a much larger scale in defense of the woke preachers, because that happens at so
Yeah.
many different churches. It doesn't just happen at College Park Church. There was another article, and I can't remember what it was about, but it was Christianity Today, and they cited my article in defense of something at David Platt's church, which they took. They took my article as saying, like, oh, this is just all these naysayers who don't give people the benefit of the doubt, and this is what happened at their church, and the reality is that's what's going on all across the U.S. And I think that's the main response that we've gotten from people who are woke defenders when it comes to Enemies Within the Church, the movie, and to all the work that we've done. You guys have both said that and made that point. But just to reiterate that, I mean, it is so prevalent. It just is.
Yeah. And one of the first things that they do is they go, in order to create this culture of the benefit of the doubt, is that they demonize. And I know that every one of us have experienced being demonized with this. Maybe maybe more than what we would ever like to even really dive into. But I remember early on in doing this, and this is one of the first times I really encountered the benefit of the doubt. And this was somebody who was going and defending Russell Moore, and it was literally the evidence that was given was quote after quote after quote after quote after quote after quote after quote of what Russell Moore was saying within context too, like in quotes from sermons, quotes from books, quotes from articles, and things like that. And the guy says, "Well, but have you read this book of his? Have you read this?" And I hadn't read that particular book. And so I said, "Well, no, I haven't, but what does that have to do with the evidence that's here? Like, I know he hasn't changed his positions. He's still going and saying the same things." And of course, we know where Russell Moore has ended. The things that keep him up at night are just incredible. But we really consider that, and we see that what this guy was trying to do was the benefit of the doubt. Well, this guy at the time was a member of the church that I was pastoring, and he ends up going and leaving the church over this, over me doing a podcast. What wasn't the last? He might have been the first, but he goes and he says afterwards, he goes and he says, "Look, I have to tell you, I think you were right about this whole social justice thing." And he goes and he says, "But I still don't like what you're doing because I don't like your tone."
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're going to talk about tone at some point, aren't we?
Yeah,
I
we're
think
gonna
that's
have
going to
to,
be on the series of
Tone
how the woke
abuse.
manipulate.
right,
The,
but
the woke manipulate tone. Goodness, what don't they manipulate?
yeah,
They're
well,
they're the police. They're the the
yeah,
tone Nazis.
right, and the whole idea though is that they're saying, you're just being so judgmental. You're just being so judgmental, and
Yeah.
and I don't know how many times you guys have heard that. I mean, have you ever heard it before, Kyle?
Well, Yes, I have. I mean, I think of it's just an example. For some reason, this pops into my mind immediately on Southern Baptist Facebook group uh, that I'm a part of, and comment on different things and post stuff.
I gave up
Uh,
on that group.
yeah, that group has some issues to say the least. But I was commenting on something, and I was having a discussion with somebody, and basically anyone that didn't agree with them was a naysayer.
Hmm.
And because I didn't agree with them, I was immediately a naysayer. And then they went, and they were accusing me of sin in this. And that's something I find very interesting. Because they'll start accusing someone of being judgmental. You're accusing them of some kind of sin. And I called him out on that, and his defense was, "Well, I just looked at the posts you've made here, and you're the chief naysayer," and didn't respond to anything else. I'm like, okay, so you're going to accuse me of sin. You're not going to defend that sin, and the only thing you're going to say is that I'm the chief naysayer. Like, talk about hypocrisy.
Can,
Like,
can
defend your point. I'm giving you evidence and reason and facts you can look at, yet you won't give any of that when you accuse me of sin.
Chief Naysayer. That sounds like a Native American name. Is that your Native American name, Kyle? Chief
Well,
Naysayer.
I am 1/128th Native Cherokee, so
Oh,
wow, you
that's even more than Elizabeth
Elizabeth Warren.
Warren.
Elizabeth Warren. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
crazy.
Mm.
Kyle, chief naysayer wit. That is
But
no,
I think that's interesting that you're saying some of that stuff. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
oh no, go for it. Go for it.
Well, I think it's interesting that you're saying some of that stuff, Kyle. Like they're just demonizing this concept of being judgmental. The reality is that as Christians, we're called to like talk about the righteous judgments of God. And so it's not that we're the ones judging. We're not the ones doing that. We're declaring the judgments that God has already wrought upon sin.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
to say that but they act like judgment in general is just wrong. And even just a declaration of what God himself has already said in his word, even these people who would say that, oh yeah, we follow the Bible. Well, do you really, if you don't adhere to the judgments of God, like at all? Like if you think that, if your first response to somebody saying, okay, maybe being in this sort of sin isn't a good idea, if your first response is, well, judge not lest ye be judged, don't you think that there's some cognitive dissonance going on there? Like just a little bit. And there's a ton of cognitive dissonance going on with that. The reality is they're just they use this as a bludgeon, as a tool to just
Mm-hmm.
slap all of us who have any kind of concern for what God's word actually has to say. It's like they have never read Proverbs a day in their life, because Proverbs talks about this. And of course, the Psalms, they've never read the Psalms either. I mean, if you read the Psalms, it's just filled with talk about how the judgments of the Lord are pure. These are
Mm-hmm.
things that we are to be desiring more than gold, more than honey from the comb. I mean, it's just, but the second you say anything about it, the second you point out that there is a sin, a pattern of sin that is existing, that is leading to this woke, this woke destruction of the church, then you are You are apparently violating Jesus's commandment, judgment, you might say, to not be the one judging.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But the
yeah,
reality is, what was Jesus getting at? He's saying that you don't. He's basically getting at the idea of not being hypocritical. So if you're going to accuse somebody else of sin, then you've got to take the plank out of your own eye. Meaning, you should not be guilty of that sin that you are talking about, that somebody else is guilty of, or else you are being a hypocrite. So
yeah.
that's what he's really getting at. But they would call Jesus judgmental for what he said. Um,
Yeah.
I'm going off on a big tangent and rant here, but that's, yeah, it gets me fired up, man.
I'm listening to what you're saying, Micah, and I'm listening to what you're saying, Kyle. And I have to be honest, you guys sound like discernment bloggers.
Oh,
Uh,
you mean
Is that another one that they
discern?
use? Is that another one that
Yeah,
they use quite a bit
yeah,
there?
that's one of their pet insults. And well,
I don't even think that's an
this
insult.
just reminded me of something similar. Wasn't the same thing. He wasn't calling people discernment bloggers, but David French getting pushback on one of his recent ridiculous articles Uh, he's been putting out many.
You saw
He
this one
constantly
too.
puts out ridiculous articles, but his response to pushback was to try and discredit the people, and that's all they do with the insults, calling people discernment bloggers. It's, oh, look at them, they're someone that you shouldn't listen to. And rather than engaging with criticism, he tried to show, oh, look, people that engage me, they haven't read my article.
I had.
Yeah, and I
I
was
wish I
like, but
hadn't.
what he posted didn't even prove that the people that were commenting didn't read his article.
No.
It's just an attempt to try and discredit, to insult, and get people to shut up. Now,
Wait,
I have a question.
Kyle, it sounds like you're not giving him the benefit of the doubt here.
What's your question, Kyle? What's your question?
Well, so people that do not give them this abused version, that do not fit into their idea of giving the benefit of the doubt, are not allowed to just even speak on a topic. Are there people that are allowed? People that don't agree with them? Are there people that supposedly don't agree with them that are allowed to speak on the topics?
You know, there are. In fact, one of them that you mentioned was there. David French is definitely one who's, you know, allowed to speak on the topics there, even though he confuses, you know, the idea of impressions and comments on Twitter. But we don't need to get into that. But one of those is one who is very gracious towards the woke. In fact, he's so gracious towards the woke, he goes to a woke church. When he goes to J.D. Greer's church, Neil Shenvi.
Oh,
It,
yeah.
and, you know, actually, speaking on Neil Shenvi, I want to take you guys back. I think it was about 2 years ago to John Harris and having a conversation that mattered. And
Oh my goodness.
I don't know that there's a man who is more gracious than John Harris. I'm just going to go out and say this. He's way nicer than me. If I would have been having this conversation, I mean, I would have ripped Neil Shenvi to shreds. But he had Neil Shenvi on his podcast, and he decided to talk about some of the differences. Because if you're not familiar with Neil Shenvi, actually the first podcast I ever recorded, I quoted Shenvi in a positive light because he speaks out against critical theory and critical race theory, but he only does so in secular circles. He never calls out critical race theory or critical theory in the church. Never does it. He's always
at least not by name. Not he does not. There might be a vague inclination, but it's never like, you know, I'm gonna name J.D. Greer.
Well,
and
it'd be
here's the
awkward for him to name his
wokeness.
pastor, but
That's why I pointed it out. It's a huge blind spot.
And it's if you would name it in the church, it would be something that would be extremely liberal that everybody already not everybody already knows that is wrong, but most people know that are wrong. He would never say that it's actually in mainstream, and that's that's one of the big issues. But John had him on his podcast. I don't know if you guys remember this. I vividly remember watching it live because I was so upset. They started talking about I believe it was James Cone, and in his books and his theology, and they start going back and forth on this. And John is literally reading and quoting the books, but Shenvi wants to be so gracious and give so much of the benefit of the doubt to James Cone. He's telling John, I haven't read the book, so I don't believe that he said that. I don't believe that he said that. And John's going, I'm literally reading you the book right now. I'm literally reading you the book. And Shenvi keeps saying, well, you can't say that because I don't know it to be true. I don't know that. I don't know that. And he keeps appealing to ignorance. But with great irony, what is Neil Shenvi doing? He's giving one person the benefit of the doubt who has the evidence that they're wrong while simultaneously judging and not giving any of the benefit of the doubt to the person he's talking to.
A person that he had just called made a presentation, surprised him with this presentation of why he's a white supremacist.
Yeah, after agreeing that he wouldn't do something like that.
Yeah, that. But
The
again, it's this
dishonesty of
rules
that
for
is-
me, not for, or rules for thee, not for me.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's just an example of how the people who push the woke narrative further. I mean, this is what you would call controlled opposition, because there is a such thing as someone who is outright woke. right? There is someone who is bought
Hmm.
hook, line, and sinker into this ideology. Then there are also people who run interference for the narrative, saying basically trying to defend those who are fully woke from those who recognize what's really going on. And Neil Shenby is, I would say, I feel totally comfortable saying that he is, in fact, controlled opposition, meaning he claims to be against woke ideology and against critical theory of varying sorts. But in reality, what he does is he runs that interference for all the people who push it. So,
Yep.
in effect, he is still dragging the church farther left through his influence. All those people
Yep.
who listen to Neil Shenby are being dragged farther left by listening to him because of this sort of thing. And then obviously the false accusations of John Harris being a white supremacist those are just ridiculous allegations that have no basis in reality. And anybody who knows
There was
John
a
or has
picture.
talked to John would know.
There was a picture,
Oh,
Micah. There
oh,
was
there's a
there was a
picture.
picture. Yeah, I mean, he was clearly wearing a Confederate uniform.
Yeah, that's yeah.
I
Of
mean, he
course,
might have
Oh,
been
there's no such
10,
thing as yeah. Well,
doing a
there's
reenactment, but who needs context or details?
right,
Um,
exactly. Like, yeah, just forget the fact that there's a such thing as historical reenactments, and the fact that people of all kinds of different people do that. There are Northerners who dress up as Southerners,
like
in
John. Yeah,
yeah,
he, like
he's in
John.
New York right now. That's
Um,
I think anyway. But the point is just that these accusations that they throw out there are ridiculous, and yet then they accuse us of not giving somebody the benefit of
yeah.
the doubt. Well, if you're going around calling somebody a white supremacist, which is a heavy and a weighty insult and a bludgeon that you can use to destroy and tarnish the reputation of somebody, and yet you're upset because he's saying, well, this guy does like James Cone, so maybe he might like critical race theory, seeing as though James Cone was like the founder of black liberation theology. Don't you think maybe, just maybe there's a possibility? No, there's no possibility that anybody who likes James Cone is woke if they are in this approved class of evangelical elites.
well, Micah, if you only heard them right, I mean, you're just not hearing them right. That's not really what
Oh,
James Cone was teaching. You're
oh,
just not giving him the benefit of the doubt. You had your mind made up before you really studied
oh,
out James
that's what
Cone.
it
No,
was.
that's these are the kind of things that they say. And I mean,
Hmm.
you, when you encounter this, it's kind of ridiculous because one of these guys that I've seen where they had this is Jonathan Lehman. So Jonathan Lehman is a guy who works with Nine Marks, and as he goes and he works with that group, he goes and does a ton on church discipline, right? And I've even heard some of this stuff on church discipline that's actually pretty solid, and people will go and talk about how great this is and things like that. But then when you talk about Jonathan Lehman and you bring up the fact that he's woke, it's amazing how many people will go and throw their hands up and say, "Oh, no, 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 he couldn't be woke." And you're going,
Mm,
"Well, he did stay on stage that you could still be pro-life and vote for those who are pro-baby murder because there's life beyond the border."
mm.
As to what it's talking about. And so basically saying, you don't really you don't have a moral obligation to vote against those who would say it's okay to murder babies. It is basically what he's saying, is that you don't have a moral obligation to do that. Well, that's
Wow.
extremely woke. And people say, well, I don't think you heard him right. Well, no, I've listened to the clip several times. I did hear him right. And of course, he also went to the London School of Economics, which is, founded by Fabian socialists. And I mean, it's an incredibly woke school that almost produces exclusively woke ideology and thought. Not that necessarily you are always the product of your school, but some of these
It's
dots
a
really
piece of
start to
evidence.
connect. Right.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you don't
Yeah.
say anything against the Marxism that originated from there at all, then that's a pretty good indicator of where your loyalties ideologically lie. You know, Kyle, I've got this question for you because we're talking a lot about the benefit of the doubt, and we're talking about how they abuse it. But in reality, what is the benefit of the doubt? Could you run through quickly and just
Yeah.
give us a pointer on what this is?
Well, and that's the important thing. So why we're doing this and why we're talking about them abusing the benefit of the doubt is because they're creating, again, a culture, an idea of a manipulated, again, how they manipulate, a manipulated idea of what benefit of the doubt is. Now, I found I mean, you can find definitions. It's fun. Idioms actually have definitions, and even in dictionaries. But a lot of them were really overly concise. But I did find one really good one that I think sums it up very elegantly, which is benefit of the doubt: the withholding of judgment so as to retain a favorable or at least neutral opinion of someone or something when the full information about the subject is not yet available. For the benefit to be given, there has to be a doubt. There has to
Hmm.
be a question, missing context, missing information. It has to be a situation where there's a gap between the information you have and a conclusion. And it's when you run into that gap that you go, now I am going to suspend my final judgment until I fill that gap. And in the meantime, I'm going to give them a degree of benefit. But this is only benefit within the context of investigation.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah,
It-
exactly. Well, and you're talking about this idea of suspending that final judgment, but it's not saying that this person absolutely didn't do this X, Y, and Z.
mhm.
And so everybody who thinks that there's evidence that they did are crazy. So that's very, very key here to understand what it is so that we can understand what it is not. Sam, I think you were about to say something. What did
Yeah,
you have to say?
you know what really stood out to me here, guys, is that it says the withholding of judgment so as to retain a favorable or at least neutral opinion. So something I think for our listeners to remember is that there is like two different phases, two different levels to the benefit of the doubt. There are some who are just trying to push you to actually have a favorable disposition of somebody who's woke. So an example of that might be Matt Chandler. So he's somebody who's woke. His church literally writes songs about microaggressions. I mean, like he's woke. I don't know what to tell people. He's woke. He was on the panel, I believe, that Vodi Bakum got up and like threw his headset down and walked off from the Gospel Coalition, never to be seen from again in the Gospel Coalition, going and saying that it was cultural Marxism, calling him out. And they're having like this panel discussion. Vodi confronts him. They tell him he can't say that. He walks off, and they continue this panel discussion with like oh yeah, Vodi's gone now, but they don't even like make mention of it. It's bizarre. But you've got that where people actually want you to like that person, and then you have people who are overtly woke. Although I mean, I would say Chandler is also overtly woke, but he's not as liked. And there are some people who are very overtly woke, and they're not as likable, and they're very open about it. They might even embrace the term woke, but they want you to maintain a neutral disposition of that person. So they're saying like, you know, you just don't have all the evidence. You haven't listened to every sermon that they've ever preached. You haven't read every book that they've ever written. You haven't done all this stuff. You just don't really know. You can't really come to that conclusion is what they're trying to go and tell you. And so you just need to be neutral. You need to do more investigation. You just need to be more gracious. But I do find it interesting, guys. Have you seen that as well? That sometimes they're only trying to push you to be neutral towards somebody, and other times it's that they are very put off that you're not actually favorable towards somebody who's woke.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's 100%. Uh but that's, again, it's what is the benefit that they gain by abusing this? Again, it's either they get you onto their side, and sometimes they're overtly trying to do that, or they at least get you to be neutral. They get you to be neutered on the issue,
Mm-hmm.
to not take an actual stance. Now, what is key about what they're doing that's different than actual benefit of the doubt? Actual benefit of the doubt is investigatory. It's, well, I am doing this investigation. I am going to suspend final judgment, and I'm essentially going to lock in my position at the moment. I'm going to lock it in until I gain what? I remove that doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Micah, you mentioned a few situations, like ones you've been involved with, and people asking you, well, you're not giving the benefit of the doubt. Did those people ever try and help remove that doubt, or did they just try and get you to stay in a position of perpetual doubt?
I think that for the time being, it was an attempt to, I guess, with College Park Church and Mark Vroegop in particular, it was an attempt to get me to stay in the position of neutrality, kind of forever, just perpetually, so that I could have my own thoughts on the subject, but if I make that public to anybody else, well then I would be accusing a brother in Christ, and that's not what we do here. We have to keep it all in house, and um, that's kind of the attitude that was had there. And it's interesting that you bring up Matt Chandler, Sam, because there was a guy who went to a church that I was attending 2 or 3 years ago, and I remember having a discussion with him over social media about Matt Chandler in particular, because we had done our work on this is more recently, but we had done the work on Matt Chandler for his profile and put together the data to show that conclusively he is in fact woke. I mean, you can't look at the microaggressions thing and think that he's not. And I just remember that this guy, instead of just having the neutral, you need to remain neutral about this perpetually, he was just shocked that and appalled, disgusted, horrified even, that I would suggest that someone, like Matt Chandler wouldn't be preaching the gospel in a true and unblemished fashion. Because this guy was just such a big Matt Chandler fan, and he couldn't possibly believe that there, and he started to buy into Matt Chandler's woke stuff, which was just kind of insane to me, because he was going to a church that it has stayed away from the woke stuff for the most part. I haven't seen any real hints of genuine wokeism at that church even to this day. Maybe some pietism, but not wokeism. And yet this guy who had been raised in this church, who's now a youth pastor out somewhere in Illinois, in the Chicago area, he has adopted some of these tenets of critical race theory as a result, because he gave this guy benefit of the doubt to the point where it's a favorable viewpoint of him. And
Yeah.
he was trying to persuade me to do the same thing. So yeah, I've seen it both ways. I've heard it both ways, as some psych fans might say.
One of the things that I think that's interesting about this is that true benefit of the doubt, in it properly being used, it's more about making a properly informed conclusion and less about improperly judging them. Whereas in the woke, seem to always be trying to get you to improperly judge. You should be favorable towards Matt Chandler because, I mean, he's Matt Chandler. You should be neutral towards James Cone because I haven't read him yet. And so, John Harris, you ought to, even if you have read him, you ought to be neutral. Even if you've done your research, I haven't. So you need to be neutral. That's what Neil Shenvi was saying to John Harris. He was appealing to ignorance, trying to think that was actually a point of logic, but it was actually a fallacy.
That's right.
And that is something that they'll do quite a bit, is because they're not interested in finding out an informed conclusion. They're interested simply in making sure that you make an improper judgment, that you go and do what they want. They've already concluded it. It's the idea that they're abusing giving the benefit of the doubt. That's what they're doing.
That's right.
Yeah, and so something you mentioned there, again, the Shenvi thing about kind of the appeal to ignorance. That is something that I see people use when they say benefit of the doubt. Quite often they're saying Not this suspending judgment until you remove that doubt, but it's what you do know already, the existing evidence you have, you need to chuck it out the window. Not only do you take this stance of, positive or neutral, but you need to jettison any information to the contrary. It is get you to only have doubt, only exist in a space of
Right.
ignorance. And it's shocking to me. Again, to talk about someone like Neil Shenvi, we've brought him up multiple times. I don't think any of us think he's a stupid person. In fact, what is his degree? He has a very advanced degree.
I think
Uh,
it's in mathematics.
it's mathematics or physics. Not a stupid man,
No.
intelligent man. In fact, I don't think any of us would say he's woke. And he said good things in regards to opposing critical race theory. But he has a massive blind spot. And what is that blind spot rooted in? It's rooted in benefit of the doubt to the point where he's put himself into an ignorant position.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's that perpetual ignorance that you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. Like, I don't know what James Cone said because I haven't read it. While John Harris is quite
Mm-hmm.
literally reading James Cone out
Yeah.
loud to him.
He's like
That
momentarily adopting standpoint epistemology.
Yeah, exactly. And
Which is bizarre.
another point that gets brought up with this is reading charitably. This is one that I hear all the time, bro. You got to read what he says charitably because, oh man, you just didn't read him
Why?
charitably. The reality is, first of all, the Bible nowhere says read charitably. That's not ever once mentioned in Scripture. So that is not a
4
moral
John
position.
3:2.
Yeah, or well, yeah, I think that's right. Or Second Revelation, maybe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, it's but
Hezekiah.
oh, okay. the the reality is that if the Bible has not made a law, if God has not set Himself a law or set a law for us, sorry, excuse me, has if He hasn't set a law for us in Scripture or a commandment in Scripture, then we can conclude that if somebody else commands us to do X and it is not a commandment of God, that it's simply not of God. It's not a moral
Yeah.
imperative. God is very clear about how we are to live. One of the things He doesn't say to do is to read charitably. Well, why is that? Why wouldn't God say to read charitably if that is a moral imperative? Well, the reality is this: if you're reading somebody charitably, you are assuming that they have A, the best of intentions, and B, the best information, or they've used the information that they have to the best of their ability for the best purposes and the best reasons. Well, anybody who admits that man is even slightly depraved, you don't have to be a Calvinist to understand this, but you do have to admit that there is depravity that exists within the heart of man, that all have fallen short of the glory of God. If you recognize that, then none of us can truly take a position of total charity when interpreting the work of other people, because
Mm-hmm.
the reality is we live in a fallen world, and even if people don't intend to, they will sin, and there are such things as unintentional sins, and they will inevitably fall. And so we can recognize that there are errors in even the things that we even the writings of people that we like. I'm not going to sit there and defend everything that C.S. Lewis ever said. I enjoy a lot of what C.S. Lewis has written, but there are going to be places where C.S. Lewis has erred. And I think that there are some places where he erred. They may be few and far between in comparison to the woke, but the reality is we should never assume that somebody is always 100% of the time sinless. That's just
Yeah.
not an assumption that we're supposed to make. We're supposed to understand the sin nature of man, and then through that lens of understanding, yes, it's totally possible for these people to have sinned, then make judgments based on the available evidence that is
You,
there.
one of the great ironies that I find in when people shout, you need to read charitably, is that they're never reading what I say charitably, ever.
Yeah.
Have you guys noticed that if it's a moral imperative to read charitably, how come I'm never read charitably? Like I'm going, well, why do you think that I'm happy that this person is in sin and wants to, and is going to hell. I don't want that person to go to hell. I
Charity for me,
that's
but not for thee.
like you should be charitable enough to understand that the reason I'm pointing out this error is because I want to see people come to the truth, not because I
Mhm.
hate them. But have you noticed
What we
that
are,
they're not,
yeah. Well, I've
whenever they
noticed that a
shout,
lot.
yeah, read
I've
charitably.
noticed that a lot, and it's this idea of reading charitably rather than reading honestly and truthfully. There's a
Yep,
big
there you
difference.
go.
Uh,
Right there.
Now, it also doesn't mean avoiding judgment. In fact, I think this is important. Giving the benefit of the doubt. And Kyle, I think that you could maybe expand on this a little bit, but giving the benefit of the doubt, by definition, is suspending judgment for a time. It's not
Mhm.
suspending it indefinitely. And so, by definition, it can't be against judgment. It's just waiting for a little bit. Am I
Yeah.
getting that right?
Well, I mean, I go further than that. It's about judgment
Mhm.
because you're to temporarily suspend the judgment until you get all the necessary information implies what? That you will come to a point where you do make a final judgment. So to give the benefit of the doubt accurately, to use that term accurately, you have to be willing to do what? Judge.
Right.
So again, I mean, we've brought all these things up already, but it's about right judgment. It's not about don't judge. It's not about don't be judgy. It's not about don't take a negative judgment. It's judge rightly. And when you come to a spot, again, where you have your information, what they said, but there's a gap, and you go, hold on. And this is something that I think we strive to do here at Wokepedia. Hold on. What is missing in this gap? And does that affect where we just shot an arrow, it's flying, and it's about to hit a certain point. Is there something there? Is there a bunch of leaves or something that are going to throw it off course and it's going to land slightly askew from where you might think it's going to hit? It's answering that question, but then you still follow the arrow to its impact point and you're willing
Mhm.
to
Right.
say, that's where the arrow just hit. You take a stand, you do judge.
It's not
Right.
denial of
It's
reality.
not denial. No.
It's affirmation of reality, and it's the temporary suspension of judgment until we know reality. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you guys. I'm going to give you guys the benefit of the doubt that you guys know what you're talking about on this one. And
Ugh.
you knew I had to get one more good joke in here before we signed off. But anything else we
Well,
need to
thanks for
say?
listening charitably.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that I think you guys need
It's too
to
much,
go to
isn't
bed
it?
now.
Yeah.
No, I think we've covered things pretty well. I hope people can see that there is a time to give benefit of the doubt, but it's not the way that the woke use it to try and get your defenses down, to try and get you to side with them, to try and get you to live in a state of ignorance to the point where a very intelligent man suddenly, once he engages a certain topic, basically the brain and the reasoning functions change. They shift into like I mentioned, it's kind of like a temporary standpoint epistemology. I'm going to temporarily adopt this new view of truth because I have to read charitably. I have to give the benefit of the doubt. I can't be critical. I can't be this and that. But have you experienced this? If you have, contact us. Contact Wokepedia at gmail.com. If you've seen examples of this, let us know. We'd be very curious to hear about that, hear about other people's examples, hear if, this is more than just our experience. Does this correspond with reality? Now, I think we're all pretty confident that it does, but we do want to hear from you.
Absolutely. And well, thank everybody for listening. And I mean, you've been listening to Wokepedia podcast. Follow us on all the places you follow podcasts on, because you can find us there. And of course, if there's a place to give us a review or a thumbs up or a like or whatever it might be, do that. Make sure you also like our Facebook page at Wokepedia. If you look that up on Facebook, I think we're the only thing that comes up. So go ahead and like us there and follow us, because we've got big things planned for this coming year. This is Christmas season, so get your Christmas wish list in, because we've got ours in, and there are some big things. Santa's not bringing it, but there are some big things that are coming here from Wokepedia going forward, and we're excited to share those with you. And make sure you go check out enemieswithinthechurch.com. Go find out all that cool stuff at enemieswithinthechurch.com. You can find our articles, you can find our radio shows, you can find our podcast, you can find all that stuff at enemieswithinthechurch.com. So check that out. And thanks for listening. Keep standing for the truth. I kind of forgot my tagline there, guys. So sorry about that. So keep standing for the truth. And
as always, give the benefit of the doubt. No, just kidding. Don't go woke.